Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 99 of the Pet Behavior Chat. And this is actually a very, very important episode because it's literally the last episode in the Pet Behavior Chat format as you know it. So, as of next week, we are merging and evolving into the Veterinary Behavior Chat, which I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end of this episode. But what a fitting way to end kind of the era of the Pet Behavior Chat, because we are speaking to one of my favorite clients, the lovely Tanya, who's got a wonderful dog called Bruno, who's got quite a story. And I'm really excited for Tanya to share Bruno's story, their story with us, because it's a really interesting one. And I think one that many of you can probably relate to. So welcome, Tanya. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your gorgeous boy, Bruno, and how you guys met, because it was quite a strange way of meeting, how you met and how you came to be in each other's lives.
So after many years of avoiding a holiday in Greece, because as an Australian who has had a lot of skin cancer, Greece was never hot on my destination until somebody introduced me to the little island of Samos. And we fell in love with the island and started returning to the island. And the first place we stayed was in a lovely little guest house by the water, run by somebody who's now a very dear friend of mine, Effie. And Effie had some years earlier rescued Bruno. So I think at the time we didn't realize it, but I think what we loved about Samos was Bruno. So we would go on holidays, I think, to be with Bruno. So Bruno, it's like a three-story apartment, and Bruno lived on the bottom floor, and we would stay in the apartment on the top, and we'd take him hiking with us every morning in the hills behind the village and swim in the ocean. Then he'd wander up. Sean would buy him souvlaki for lunch. I think that was perhaps in the days before I knew dogs maybe shouldn't eat half the things in a souvlaki. But anyway, turns out Greek dogs eat souvlaki. And we've returned year on year for several years until last year, due to some circumstances in their family, they were really unable to keep Bruno. So we offered to babysit him for a year and bring him back with us to Abu Dhabi. And of course, that very much turned into he's now with us forever, which has
Yeah,
truly changed my life.
amazing. And tell me a little bit about his behavioral history whilst he was still in Greece, because even back then, like as we kind of dove deeper into his history, yes, he was, the ultimate kind of freedom living dog. He hiked, he swam, he was very much out in nature. But there were a few signs already back in Greece that there were some things that he felt uncomfortable with. Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Yes, look, in hindsight, I've not had a dog before. My husband had, and in hindsight, I totally didn't see any of the signs. I guess I didn't know what was going on. But the short version is that Bruno had a owner, a mum, I think a young student for the first 6 months of his life, and then she couldn't take care of him, and she gave him to a man in the village who put him in a 1 by 1 meter cage for 3 years that didn't have a roof. And this particular island suffers incredible weather. So he suffered through some very hot summers and some shocking winters,
Mm.
rain, thunder, lightning. So when my friend found him, which was by absolute happenstance during COVID, when she was ushered by the police in a different direction and found him, and it took her a week to rescue him. He had 300 ticks and leeches. I mean, he was all but wild. And she brought him home and really nursed him back. And in hindsight now, when I talk to her about his behaviours, I mean, she runs a small guest house, so it was amazing that he was even able to adapt to coming back, having been with wild people, wild weather, wild animals, for so long, and to be in this place. And she said he was very, very sort of stand apart, very independent, no affection, wouldn't do anything he was told to, didn't behave badly, but just didn't do anything. Certainly had no inclination to be around people, terrified of noises, and very, very grumpy at pretty much everybody that drove a truck, a bus, a motorbike, a child, or the local workman in town. So she, bless her, had a really hard time, bringing him back. Now, I didn't see that on holidays because I took him into the mountains, and he wandered freely, and he was happy as, and his tail would wag, and I would hear him barking and the occasional thing. But I'd realised that during the occasional piece of weather, he would be found hiding, like he'd crawl into the
Mhm.
tiniest corner, and occasionally he would be up in our apartment and we couldn't find him, and then I'd realize he'd crawled into the cupboard and he was in Sean's clothes, and he'd somehow managed to with his nose to pull the cupboard. And at the time I thought it was pretty cute that he'd found that place to hide. I didn't know enough about animals to realize that he was actually reverting because he was scared. So minor behavior, sort of, elements of that certainly was happening without me knowing. Effie said that he'd got to a point where he was under her bed of a night time and had crawled into a hole that wasn't big enough to put a rat, and he's a 20-kilo dog. So he had been demonstrating a lot of that. I just hadn't seen it. And it certainly wasn't like that when he arrived here.
Yeah. So then tell us a little bit about when he did arrive there. So how was life when he first arrived in Abu Dhabi, and how did he cope with the travel? How was he after the flight?
I think I'm pleased that I had no idea just how traumatic his life had been and just what he was suffering, because it would have made me feel even worse about the travel. So we had to go by the island. You can only go by ferry with an animal to Athens because the planes are too small. So we did a 9-hour ferry ride, and then I handed him over to a gentleman, a pet taxi in Athens, which truly broke my heart. I've never actually had a child, so I haven't had to give a child away, but it felt like I was, and I watched him in a little cage with a man who was very lovely drive away with me for the biggest, saddest, brownest eyes I've ever seen. Just hoping that the next couple of days would go really well. And he was in a beautiful, there was a lady just outside of Athens airport that runs a small business that takes very, very good care of animals. And she was fabulous. So he was there for a couple of days and then boxed up. It was only because the Greek authorities take some time to get their paperwork sorted, boxed up and sent to us. And I used a fabulous lady in Dubai, who moved him for us, and she was amazing. So he came to us at 3 o'clock in the morning, bounced out of the back of the van he was in from Dubai, ran around the car park, wagged his tail, and happy as Larry. Came upstairs, slept in our bedroom, and really we had, I want to say, almost 6 months of normalcy, other than the Formula One cars across the road backfiring, and, us being out walking and him being terrified and dragging me home, like a sleigh full of reindeers. I had no idea that a dog could have quite that much pull. But by the time he got home, he'd be fine. He was a little unsettled. At the occasional fireworks, a little unsettled. Um, some building site noise, unsettled for perhaps an hour or two, crawl into a corner, and but really just minor events that I was assuming that every dog would go through. I really just hadn't triggered how bad it was at that stage.
Mm-hmm. And so that's really interesting to me that, he was displaying sort of some reaction or aversion to noises, but then would come home and he would be able to kind of bounce back and, have that, that recovery and be actually pretty good at home. And so when did things start to get worse at home, and what happened then?
It was a series of events that I still to this day can't quite place. And at the time, again, as a new dog owner and just being so unaware of what the behaviors that I now realize I had been seeing in him were, that I just hadn't put together, properly. But it was, I think I had traveled and I'd come back, and while he was very happy to see me, I noticed him to be different. I noticed that he was starting to be, he was quite standoffish. Like, he was always with us, no matter where we were in the house. In fact, if my husband and I were anywhere in the house, he was somewhere between us. Even on different floors, he'd be on the stairs. Like, he was always somewhere. But he wasn't. He started to be downstairs and was starting to spend a lot of time alone. And at that stage, I came to your practice and I think I saw Dr. Helen. I said, I'm worried that maybe he's in pain or something's going on, because his behavior just isn't quite the same. But it was quite gradual. And then I think there was a series of unexpected fireworks. There was, perhaps we did sedate him to test to see if there was anything that was happening with him medically. of which he didn't do very well with the sedation, and he wasn't quite himself. And then I honestly think what happened was the planes changed. I think we're quite close to the airport, and the runway changed, and then the noise of the planes started to come over pretty hard and fast. And there was a very tragic earthquake on the island that Bruno comes from, which was very sad, destroyed many of the houses on the island, and actually there were some lives lost. And I feel like, I don't know, but I feel like when a plane goes over, our house feels it, that there's a little bit of a tremor, and I feel like
Mm.
I'm assuming that Bruno, that is what's bothering him. So he then really within 2 weeks went from a dog who was being separate from us to a dog who spent 23 hours a day in our basement under a rack that was, so high off the ground, barely a cat wouldn't get under there, let alone a dog of his size, shivering, shaking, and staring at the roof like aliens were going to come through the roof. In fact, I think when I listened to Janice and Robbie's story, she described him as having looked at the walls as if there were dead people there. And that's exactly what I realized Bruno was doing. It was like he was seeing something or sensing something that was just so utterly horrifying for him. Like I've seen a lot in my life. I've been a lot of places. I don't think I've ever seen such fear in a living thing. In fact, it truly, truly, truly broke my heart. And there was nothing I could do. I couldn't comfort him. I couldn't coax him out of there. If I took him outside, that was the bit that really was so odd to me. If I took him outside, he was perfectly normal. He was happy. He'd walk. It was like he was a normal person. The second he walked into our house. So when we went through all the maddening of, we've just renewed our villa, should we be moving villas?
Mm.
Is it all the trouble, all the sort of root cause analysis of what do we do and how do we do it and how do we make it better? Not really still understanding what was going on. So we tried everything, absolutely everything over and over again to try and make things better for him inside our house, because the fear was we could move, but maybe the same things will trigger him somewhere else. And I think I just didn't understand the cause and the effect and the trigger. So did I answer your question? I feel like
Yeah,
I maybe got
you
on a
did.
tangent there.
No, no, you absolutely did. And chat to me a little bit about your emotional state in that time, because I think, everything that you've described right there is kind of a pet owner's worst nightmare, right? Like the not really knowing what's going on, not really being able to do anything to help your pet, not knowing, do I need to change my environment? Do I need to move house? What's going on? What was kind of going through your mind cognitively, but how were you feeling at that moment in time?
I don't think that anything has ever bothered me as much. It occurs to me that when you have an animal in your life, that they have a degree of dependence on you that is something that I've not yet known, and truly rewarding, but it's a lot of responsibility. And because they can't talk, and even though I try very hard to learn to communicate with him and to understand what he's doing, I really couldn't understand it. So I'm somebody who problem solves. I'm somebody who has a pretty good instinct on how to fix things, and I have always been able to. So it was frustrating because I couldn't work out what the answer is, but it was emotionally, I mean, if you were to talk to my friends, it was like I had a child who was in the ICU. Like I don't think anything had bothered me as much. I was so distressed. And I remember actually saying to you, because it was only through a very dear friend of mine who had also been her now sadly deceased dog had been a patient of yours, and
Mm.
she'd been through a similar process, and she turned up one day and she's like, stop, enough, all of this. There's only one solution. You need to talk to Dr. Catherine. And I, I had the immediate fear of drugs, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But she was like, stop, you've done it all, there is nowhere to go, because I literally had tears in my eyes as I was telling her the story. And so we then tried to get an appointment with you, and I don't know whether you were traveling, but you were very busy, and it was going to be like a 6-week wait. And I
Mm.
remember leaving a voice message to the lovely Ben, and I was in tears, and I said, I can't understand, basically how I've got to this point, but I'm telling you that no living thing deserves to live like this. And can you please help me, even if you can't see me, because otherwise I wasn't talking. I mean, I guess I was thinking about euthanasia. I'm like, this dog by this stage had been 4 or 6 weeks of this insanity, and I tried everything. And it's like, I can't imagine my life without this little man, but he doesn't deserve to live like this. There has to be a way around it. And then we obviously connected, and you started me on the journey. So yeah,
Yeah.
devastating, absolutely, like I've never known before, really. Just terribly, terribly concerned.
Yeah. I actually didn't know, or maybe I did, but maybe it just slipped my mind that you were thinking about euthanasia at that point. I think now that I think about it, I think I did. But it's crazy, right? That we get to that point where we just see this level of mental and emotional pain that they're in, this degree of, like you say, that level of fear that you hadn't seen before, in whether that was human or animal. And yeah, we actually think like, this is no life, there's no quality of life there at this particular point in time.
It's
And that,
terrible.
yeah, I think that's what a lot of people also, that getting to that particular point where you think, well, maybe he's better off actually just not being here anymore. And that must be absolutely heart-wrenching. Yeah.
It really was. And I think it wasn't that I'd made up my mind that's what I needed to do, but I remember saying, I will do everything I can, absolutely everything I can, but this is no way for anybody to live. And I mean, I've spent my life in war zones, I've seen it all. I was but I'm like, this little man, I can't help him. Like,
Yeah.
I did everything. I read everything. I've every pheromone, every gadget, widget, you name it, we did it. Nothing made any difference. It was just, he was an empty shell. He was
Yeah. Yeah.
just an empty, terrified shell. And having seen what happens to humans who go through like that, I really was terribly concerned we'd never get him back out of it. It was just like he'd broken,
Yeah.
and
No.
wasn't expecting him to come back.
Yeah. I actually remember hearing your voice note, the message that you left for Ben. And we then did make a plan for me to see you sooner. It wasn't an in-person visit. We connected virtually, which I think, was more than enough, together with the videos that you sent of him hiding in the basement, the number of different spots that he had made there for himself. There were a couple, right, that were like his. Yeah. And I mean, yeah. So we did connect actually pretty quickly after I heard your
You did.
voice note. And I was like, oh my God, okay. And it's actually interesting because so many times we hear, oh, behavior is not an emergency discipline, right? It's not emergency medicine. It's not the ER. It's not even internal medicine or surgery where, you have urgent situations. And I actually don't agree with that. I think that behavior medicine absolutely can also pose cases that present as emergencies. And to me, Bruno's case felt like an emergency. And I just thought, okay, we actually do need to do something, even if it's, like you say, just getting started. And then after we did our initial virtual, we then connected in person as well. So let's first of all talk about, like, how did you experience that sort of first encounter? And then we'll talk about the meds, because I think that's such an important piece. And I know that many, many, many of my clients, the thought of medication is a little bit, I guess, jarring initially, because, there's often just not knowing exactly what to expect and not understanding how that might work. How was that for you? So when we kind of went through everything, how did you experience that?
So I guess to your earlier part of the question, I think I probably cried the second time after I got off the phone with you, just in terms of absolute relief that we'd had that call, and that I remember you just feeling really confident as you talked through all of his symptoms. I was listening to you thinking, this is not a one-off. This isn't the first time an animal feels like this. Like, and I remember you doing the sort of the pros and the cons, and going through your sort of calculated logic on which you thought might be the best sort of medication route, as you sort of worked your way through it. And it was just so incredibly reassuring to think that there might actually be a pathway. And I think I remember saying to you at the time, I personally have had I have a quite a rare disease, and as a result of that disease, I receive a treatment. As a result of that treatment, I can be in quite a lot of pain. So over the years, The hospitals here have given me some pretty strong painkillers, which make me, I'm very sensitive to them. So they can make me very zombie-like. I've been very altered, and I'm very adverse personally medication. I don't like the way it feels. I'll take a supplement or a herb all day, any day, before I will actually take medication. So the thought of actually giving it to this little broken guy, so I say that because he's under my feet sleeping as we speak, which is very nice to have him back up in the land of the living. But the thought of giving this little broken guy medication and having him feel like I knew what it felt like to be medicated, and for him not to be able to say, stop that, because he couldn't communicate with me about how bad he was going to feel with the meds. Like, I realized we were just going to have to trust and put him on that journey regardless. But I think I felt at that time that I had no other choice. But I think it also had helped that, my dear friend Camilla had been on that journey with you, and it had made such a difference. So,
Yeah.
but I really did feel, but I have to, and listening to some of your other podcasts, I was definitely not inclined. I was terrified of all those things I've heard people say. I was worried it would affect his organs.
Yeah.
You still ultimately hope that medication doesn't affect. I was worried that he'd feel dreadful, trapped in his own self, even worse than what he was feeling, and I just wouldn't know. Um, and I was worried about how I would know it was helping,
Yeah.
and would he be on it forever? And in fact, I think I even asked you, would it even work? And I mean, you were very honest with me about us just having to wait and see,
Yeah.
to understand the journey, and to implement the strategies, I guess, as we understood his behaviors. So yeah, no, it was not something I was comfortable with doing at all, but you certainly gave me the confidence to know that it felt like the right thing to do. And
Oh,
honestly, it was the best thing we ever did.
yeah, we can say that now in hindsight.
We can say that in hindsight. Totally changed his life.
Yeah.
Totally changed his life. Totally changed all of our lives.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, these cases, when we have behavior that's quite so extreme, sometimes it can be difficult to find the right medication, to find the right medication combination. Absolutely. We talk through potential side effects from that. And you're absolutely right. They don't understand that they're taking medication. So if they do feel different as a result of the medication, there's no kind of cause and effect. There's no correlation that they can draw from that. And absolutely, sometimes they can feel weird from medication, and that feeling weird might make them even more anxious. So all of your concerns were 100% valid. And because they can't communicate that with us, and because we can't communicate with them, hey, this is the medication, we just need to kind of maybe push through it for a little moment. That's the difficult piece. So I completely understand all of that. But I think I agree with you. We were at a point where I don't think we really had many other options for him. The degree of panic that he had, and the fact that he was spending like those 23 hours a day, down in the basement hidden, we really didn't have another option. I think, that was that was quite clear to both of us, I think. And yeah, we found it a really good medication combination for him. However, I personally think that treating his musculo-skeletal pain, which we kind of diagnosed in parallel, I know Dr. Helen had already, identified that, and we had started him on meds to treat that, and then ramping that up at the same time. I think the combination of that for me was probably what made the biggest difference.
Yeah, I remember you raising his musculoskeletal pain, and it's funny, again, it's so hard to know. I didn't really think he had any. I think when we were training with the lovely Elsa, and she did some amazing things in the beginning, but I think she was more training me how to have a dog than she was training Bruno. But I remember her picking up that she thought that his gait had changed or something. And we had been seeing Dr. Helen and trying the Librella and the other one. But
Yeah.
I thought he was good. But there is no doubt. I think it is a combination of both. I think he does have pain that he very well hides because he just loves to get out and about. So
Mm.
he's never going to not go out there, but I think he suffers from it afterwards. And I think my husband often refers to him as a cranky old Greek man. But I do think it does make him a bit of a cranky old Greek man sometimes, never with us. Because I think you were right. I think he does. It was a combination of both. And perhaps as with humans, it does make you more anxious if you're
Oh, yeah.
hurting.
Yeah, I mean, we know that for sure. The pathways in the brain that, that are responsible for anxiety and pain modulation or pain processing are similar, very, or the same, or very similar. And it's well documented. There are a couple of studies now that show that noise sensitivities worsen with pain. So then I kind of went back and I actually thought, God, I wonder whether that period where he got so much worse, where he went from being able to cope with noises outside and be, a pretty happy dog at home, when that switched to him no longer being able to cope at home, I actually wondered whether that was the time that maybe he had a pain flare up, or he had some breakthrough pain, or that was the moment that the pain got worse. And then it took us a moment to get on top of that pain, because that can take a while. And so we had this period of things like getting really bad, and then it took both the psychopharmaceutical meds as well as that pain relief to actually get him to where he is now.
So I think you could be right in hindsight, because we've always hiked with Bruno in Greece, and often 5, 8 kilometers of a morning. But I realized, because of their family circumstances, he'd been staying somewhere for many months where he hadn't done any activities. In fact, he was going to the tavern full of Greek men who were feeding him souvlaki all day, and goodness knows what else. And of course, we brought him here, and it was winter, and we were walking him 3, 4, 5 times a day. We do a lot of exercise. And so we had potentially not recognized that he wasn't a fit, strong, as we would previously. His Greek mum used to walk him in the hills all through winter, but I don't think he'd had that build up. So we may very well have over exercised him. As much as he was enjoying it, he could very well have been flared.
Yeah. And the other thing, we know chronic pain in animals is notoriously difficult to diagnose. It's really hard, even though we're learning more and more about it. Even the pain specialists that do nothing else but deal with pain still find it very difficult to accurately diagnose chronic pain in pets, because it's all self-reported in people, which obviously they can't do. So I think definitely, there's that piece. So that's always so difficult, actually recognizing the chronic pain. And I think I feel very fortunate that you were just able to trust us and go with it, and me saying, look, his behavior change could absolutely be part of his pain presentation, and that we actually managed to get on top of that.
It's interesting. I don't know whether you catch me doing this, but I'm always trying to back him out of the meds. I don't know whether all your patients do that, but I'm always like, okay, so since he's been taking this now, can we lessen it? Can we, so he has the Librela and he has this, and then there's Panadol. It's like, could we just pull back? And it's funny how our inclination is as humans. You want to take medication for a little while and then get yourself back off it as soon as you possibly can. But I'm assuming with animals that potentially needs to be different,
But it's such a valid question. And every single one of my clients asks the same thing. How long does he need to be on it for? Or she, and my answer is always, well, if they're doing really well on it, we could try and pull back, but why would we? But it's a really valid question. And of course, all medications have potential side effects, especially when we start combining medications. We have to be very cautious about medication interactions. So we're always thinking about that. But when we have chronic diseases, and both behavior presentations as well as chronic pain are both chronic diseases, it's the management that is the really important part. And oftentimes we can have environmental modifications or learning that help us to then reduce meds over time. But sometimes we also can't, but you're right. And I think everybody is the same. It's one of the top questions I get asked pretty much in every case is, so when can we wean him off? When can we wean her off? So I think that's just human nature. I think you're absolutely right. So
no time soon.
Yeah, no time, definitely no time soon.
We like happy, calm Bruno.
We do. And speaking of which, where is Bruno at now? How's he doing? And yeah, tell us about how things evolved.
It's interesting that something so traumatic can almost be impossible to remember now, which tells me
Mm.
that it's just we turned a full page. Uh, I was only explaining to somebody yesterday, I think he's 80, 90% of the way recovered. And my husband's version was, he said, I think he's actually 95, which is truly
Wow.
amazing. In fact, given that I think we didn't know what we were dealing with before, but he's still, he's certainly with us all of the time that we're in the house now. So no longer in the basement. The basement's his happy place that he goes to if he's a little bit hot. He's got man caves down there, or dog caves everywhere, that he goes down to. But I'm now comfortable for him to go down there just because he wants to be, not because it's his scared place. He he's being very brave. Like he'll be upstairs with us of an evening and a plane will fly over. So either the light or the noise will come. It will
Hmm.
alert him. He will stand up and look around, but he's brave enough to stay with us now, which is great. So it is still affecting him, but he seems to be relaxed enough to be able to deal with it and to come back. Sometimes it takes a bit of coaxing. And he now spends the evenings back upstairs with us, which is really wonderful. I think that was one of the things that really broke my heart, that he was in so much pain, or in so much fear and alone. I knew if I couldn't fix it, I at least wanted him to be around his pack. And being 2 stories away, alone, and again, I was listening to Janice, and bless her for sleeping on the couch for a month.
Yeah.
It was like there were times that I lay on my basement floor, but it's like, I really can't sleep here, dog. I've got to get some sleep. But it didn't matter because he didn't want me anywhere near him anyway. Like nothing seemed to be making a difference. So he is back upstairs. He's happy. He's healthy. He's doing amazing. The middle floor still spooks him. We've put curtains
Yeah.
up. We've done what we can. There's something going on there for him. Again, I try to work it out, and then I've worked out I just can't work it out. It's going on in his mind. There's something
Yeah.
that is there, that is a memory or something that I don't understand. But while he seems happy enough, we can usually distract him from that.
Yeah. And you're right. Those are those conditioned emotional responses that are really difficult to undo sometimes. And sometimes we don't even know, what's the trigger that causes the next trigger that might cause the next trigger that might then cause the fear.
Mm,
And also perception. I mean, there are some senses, especially smell, that we're not privy to what our dogs experience or perceive from an olfactory perspective. So who knows, maybe there was something, an unpleasant smell that he associates with something.
mm,
So yeah, I think that's the hard thing with veterinary behavior medicine, is sometimes we'll just never quite know for sure, because again, we've got that communication piece, which we can read a lot of their communication, but sometimes that final piece is missing for us, where we can make sort of 100% sense of it, and maybe we don't even need to. So yeah.
I tell you, the other thing that I was just thinking about while you were saying that, when it comes to his medication, one of the other, I think when you live in the UAE, it's like it's one thing to have a medicated animal. It's another thing to have a medicated animal when you're trying, where you don't have a backyard, and you need to take a medicated animal out for walks, and understanding, what when you medicate, and when, like if you're going to take somebody outside in the heat, and does the heat, particularly our brutal summers, does it really adversely? And one of the absolute godsends to me has been the relationship that we have on your WhatsApp group. So
Yeah.
my ability to ask 1,000 stupid questions a week to you and Ben has been really just it's been an absolute lifesaver, because I mean, A, I'm a new dog owner, but B, it's just so many unknowns, like so many just unquantifiable, unknown things about what happens, particularly in this environment, like every single day. And so I do really appreciate the fact that you have that ability to be able to not just diagnose the medication, but that you provide that support for us in the background. Because I don't know how I would have felt about him taking the medications and the
Mm.
observations I had, if I couldn't have asked all of those questions, and if you weren't able to give me the reassurance and the direction, on my 100 voice WhatsApps to you. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. And it goes both ways, because for me, sending a dog off with medication, and let's face it, Bruno's on a couple of different medications. For me, sending, a patient away on meds and not knowing how they're doing, or whether they're having a really adverse reaction to it, whether there are side effects, that actually would cause me to not sleep at night. So the WhatsApp group is there as much for my benefit as it is for yours. And I remember saying to you, I think when we had our initial consultation, once you're in, you're in. It's not like I'm going to be like, right, let's take these meds and off you go, and I'll see you in 3 months. It just doesn't work like that. And I think, again, there's a difference between supporting a patient that has chronic disease than, if you'd come in with him with a cut to his leg that we would stitch up, and then he'd come back a few times for revisits, make sure everything had healed well, and that's it, job done. It's a whole different kind of game, I think, when we have ongoing long-term medications, fluctuations in state, behavior is never linear. It's always a little bit fluid and up and down, better days, worse days. And then sometimes just, being able to say, it's fine, he's just having a bad day, stick with it for another 3 or 4 days, and then report back to me. And that's actually a tip I picked up from my mentor's mentor. She said, Debbie Horwitz always says, just leave it another 7 days and see what happens. And 9 times out of 10, the situation will resolve itself, because it's just part of that natural ebb and flow. Obviously, if it's something very, very critical, that's not the case. But sometimes, when we're working through side effects or how to manage things, you have to allow for that time. And that can be difficult for us as humans, right? Because we all would like a quick fix. And unfortunately, that's just not realistic when you're dealing with chronic disease, as I'm sure you also know from yourself, from your own experiences.
Definitely. And that not knowing what to expect and not knowing how to know, if something's working. I mean, it sounds really counterintuitive in hindsight, either they're normal, but of course they don't get normal overnight. It takes a while. It's still taking a while. I mean, it's been some months now, and in fact, now I look around and I see a lot of other dogs out there that I think might need some help. I now know what I now know what I'm dealing with. It's funny how I was so oblivious to it in the first place, but yeah, no, it is. It is so very nice to see him back to normal.
Yeah, it is. But you're right. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like you just said, all of a sudden you look around and you see all these behaviors that you now have a little bit more insight into, and it's a whole different ball game. But yeah, I can't say how over the moon I am with Bruno's journey and how well he's doing. He's just one of those dogs who validates and reinforces how important behavior medicine is in the veterinary field. And that not all, I think just to what you said there, I don't think he'll ever be normal, 100% normal. I think he'll always be managed. We'll always need to manage his mental and emotional health. But then I think that's the same with every living being. We all have the potential propensity to have not great mental and emotional health, depending on the environment that we're in or whatever's going on. So it's something that I think is always going to need to be managed. But I think stories like his and like Robbie's, I know you've alluded a couple of times to Robbie, these sort of very, very extreme behavioral presentations that actually we managed to get under control quite quickly, because in the grand scheme of things, a few months, in my view, isn't that long. It just is so reinforcing and validating that this is such an important area of veterinary medicine, and we just need to keep shouting it from the rooftops, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's, in hindsight, I look back and think it's really interesting how it sneaks up on you. You would assume, like when a human breaks, they quite often break in such an obvious way. When you have mental health issues, it becomes so obvious. But you realize that with animals, that they are perhaps in pain and hiding it, being triggered by events that everybody says, yes, whenever there's fireworks, dogs get triggered. Yes, my dog has that issue. I give it something to decrease the anxiety. But, you realize it's actually, in many cases, there's a slow buildup that you don't see until then when it happens, and it flips so fast that it does seem unrecoverable. And the fact that we are however many months, through that journey, and I think we really did see I remember saying to you in the first week that there was something that had happened. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't that his behavior had changed, but something about him had changed. And I remember you saying, that's great, because what it tells me is the medication is having an effect on him. I think
Yeah.
maybe he was a little bit sleepy in the beginning.
Yeah.
And you were
Oh,
like,
yeah.
well, that's great, because it's actually showing that it's working on him. But actually, I don't know. I mean, again, it turns out dogs sleep an awful lot anyway, but I don't think he is in any way sedated. I find that the way that you've managed his medication, I don't find him sedated in any way. Perhaps he does get better quality sleep than maybe what he was doing before because he's not as anxious. But I don't find him to be, I don't find him to be medicated, which is really, really reassuring. But as I say, in the beginning that he was, but as we sort of went through that journey of trying, there was a couple of weeks there where I was like, okay, he's a little bit better. He's still downstairs. He'll come up, and then you worry and you think, how's he ever going to get to the point where he actually feels comfortable? And then slowly but surely, he does, and he is. And
Yeah.
yes, may that not change.
Yes, I know. And I'm so pleased that you said that, because I think that's one of the other big concerns, isn't it? That people are worried that their dogs are going to either turn into zombies or they're going to have some kind of a personality change. And I always say medications can't change personality. In fact, what we want to do is bring out, the happy, the goofy, their true selves. And you're right, the medication side effects for a couple of weeks can cause a little bit of drowsiness, lethargy, sleepiness. Sometimes we quite like that side effect, especially if they haven't been sleeping well because they've been so anxious. But the end goal is always to have, exactly like you've just said, a pet where you actually wouldn't know. Like if your friends saw him, right, they wouldn't know that he was on meds because he's not obviously sedated or anything like that. That's not the aim of the game. We're not creating zombies that are just lying around in the corner, not behaving at all anymore. It's a true addressing of mental and emotional state. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Yay. Well,
As he's sleeping under my feet now.
Yeah. See, I mean, that's perfect. What a perfect way to end things. Or the fact that he's been there under your feet the whole time makes me very
Whole
happy.
time. Yes. There was a time that we used to we'd do anything we could to get him back upstairs with us, and now he's back stuck to us like glue. So
I know. That's
very,
great.
very, very happy. Bruno
Good.
says he's happy too.
Good. That makes me happy as well. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time, for sharing your story. I know sometimes these stories can be difficult to share because they are emotional and, they're just, life events that we go through. So I'm so appreciative. And I think anybody listening to this podcast will definitely have gotten something from it, especially if they find themselves in a similar situation to how you and Bruno were. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And you're very, very welcome.
Thank you. And to everyone listening, I promised you I would give you a bit of an update on what's happening next week as we merge into the veterinary behavior chat. So episode 100 will be the inaugural episode of the veterinary behavior chat. So I'm going to talk to you about all the things you can expect from that. We've got some really exciting things coming up, and we are absolutely going to keep these pet caregiver episodes in there because I think they're so valuable, both for professionals listening to this as well as other pet parents listening to this. So this is an episode type that we are absolutely going to keep hold of going forwards. But we've got lots of new and exciting and pretty fun things coming up as well. So please tune in next week as we make the switch into the veterinary behavior chat. And yeah, how lovely to finish on this episode. I mean, what a heartwarming story. And yeah, thank you again, Tanya, for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, look, it's my pleasure. And when you first asked me, I was very reticent, as you know. But when I listened to your stories, I realized that if I can have one other pet family out there more quickly move through the journey to bring their pet back to great mental health, then I'd shout it from the rooftops because, the journey we've been from has just been life-changing for all of us. And now I'm getting teary again. Thank you.
My pleasure. And that's actually the intention of these episodes, right? If it can help one other pet somewhere, then our job is done. So yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you next week for the amazing episode 100, which is where all the juicy things happen. So see you next week and bye for now.